Hey guys, welcome back. The US government has just passed a bill requiring TikTok to be banned or sold to another company within the next 9 months.
All right. I know, man. It hurt me too.
TikTok's CEO came out guns ablaze, firing shots at the US government, basically saying, "See you in court."
We are confident and we will keep fighting for your rights in the courts. The facts and the Constitution are on our side, and we expect to prevail again.
And many others are calling the ban un-American.
This is the dumbest, most un-American thing I have ever seen politics ever do in the history of my life.
Meanwhile, companies like Meta and Google stand to benefit greatly from a ban like this. So in this video today, I want to go through, is the ban justified? What are the potential likely outcomes, and how will Meta and Google potentially benefit from this decision? First of all, why is this ban being considered in the first place? Well, there are a number of national security concerns, which I'm sure you've heard all before. But Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, summed it up pretty well by saying that TikTok is effectively a tool of the Chinese government.
The key point is that the parent company is, for all intents and purposes, beholden to the CCP.
It allows them to manipulate political discourse around the world and in the United States by manipulating the algorithm in order to show certain topics in a certain light to its users. For example, studies have shown that TikTok is far less likely to show topics that are sensitive to China's national security, like the Hong Kong protests or the South China Sea issue, compared to similar social media apps like Meta's Instagram or Facebook. In addition to that, there are huge concerns that the vast trove of US user data, which includes biometric data, location data, and so on, may be accessible by the Chinese government for use in traditional espionage activities. Just think about what you could do with knowing the location of every single US citizen that uses the app at any given moment in time. In fact, TikTok has already been caught red-handed spying on journalists by using their location data when they had the app installed on their phones in order to try and find whether they were talking to certain sources within the company. In October 2022, a prominent journalist at Forbes, Emily Baker White, wrote an article about TikTok claiming that the company planned to use its location data to pinpoint the exact location of specific US citizens.
We knew that a ByteDance team called the Internal Audit and Risk Control Department had tracked the specific location of individual US citizens for a purpose that didn't have to do with advertising or serving them content in the app.
And the company wrote a rebuttal on Twitter saying that they had never done so and they would never do so in the future for any US government employees, journalists, or prominent figures. Meanwhile, it later came out that they had already accessed Emily Baker White's phone.
Now, we actually knew back in October that we were the people who were being tracked, but we couldn't say that at the time because we were protecting a source.
And so they have a clear record that they are willing to lie about this exact issue. TikTok also has a record of manipulating the algorithm in order to control the discourse on certain topics, especially when it pertains to criticism of their company. Joshua Ma, an executive at the company, had an argument with the London staffing team saying that as a capitalist, he didn't believe in maternity leave. And an article was written on it by the Financial Times. In response, leaks showed that the company considered manipulating their algorithm in order to censor any TikTok live streams that contain the terms Financial Times or maternity. That shows that they are willing to go to the lengths to cover up certain topics. Even though the company denied actually doing so, the fact that it was an option on the table points towards the fact that they've done so previously and often. Were the Chinese government to lean on TikTok in order to cover up or censor a certain topic, it's almost certain they would do so. We know in China that the line between private companies and the state is a very thin one. And if a private business was to criticize the Chinese government, even by allowing its users to do so, they would probably fall afoul of the CCP leadership. Just look at Jack Ma, who was pretty much silenced for just criticizing the Chinese government. So I personally think that the national security concerns are well founded. But Is the ban itself un-American? Well, the TikTok CEO, Shu Chu, certainly seems to think so. He's said that TikTok plans to challenge the ban or divestment based on the First Amendment, the right of all Americans and companies operating in America to have freedom of speech. Others have echoed this sentiment, saying that they dislike that America is stooping to China's level by enforcing this ban on certain companies. But in my opinion, this doesn't make sense. America is a free country, but it isn't a stupid country. Think about a trade war, for example. If one country is to enact trade tariffs on another country, that other country is more than fairly able to raise the exact same tariffs against the original country. That's not controversial at all. So if China bans all American social media companies like YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and so on, then why can't America enact a ban back on China? There shouldn't be a one-way level of access to each other's markets. China shouldn't have access to the American market without the Americans having access to China's market. So what are the likely outcomes here? Well, TikTok's ban or sale has been set for the day before Biden's first term ends in January 2025. But legal action from the company could extend this for several years in reality. Meanwhile, several conflicting reports have come out about TikTok's intentions for its US operations. Some reports have stated that the company plans to effectively be banned from the US and it doesn't want to sell its US operations. Meanwhile, other reports have stated that the company is willing to sell its US operations and allow them to be spun off into a separate company, but without the secret source of the company, its algorithm. China's laws allow it to have a veto in whether its companies sell trade secrets to foreign countries, and it seems increasingly likely that it will use it in the case of TikTok. Even if TikTok wanted to sell its US operations with the algorithm intact, it doesn't seem like the Chinese government would allow it. Back in 2020, when TikTok was going to be banned, a consortium of companies, including Walmart and Oracle of all things, were in line to purchase the US operations of TikTok. But without the algorithm, I doubt they would be as interested. And even if they were, it would be extremely difficult for them to maintain the app without a dedicated team of AI specialists and algorithmic specialists who are used to working in the area. Those engineers do not come for free, they're very expensive, and they're also very rare, with the job market very tight as is. An independent US TikTok would then have to build an entirely new algorithm from scratch with very little experience in the area. If you look at Meta, it has invested massively into AI in order to improve its recommendations algorithm on Instagram and Facebook recently, but it's spent in the magnitude of $40 billion per year, forecast for this year at least, in order to do so, and the market has punished the stock at its recent earnings for that exact reason. Would an independent TikTok actually be able to afford this, all whilst its users are experiencing significant declines in the quality of the app's algorithmic recommendations? Probably not, without hemorrhaging users. The forced sale or banning of the US part of TikTok would mean the exact same thing for the rest of TikTok's global users, and that would be the removal of US influencers and content from the global app. Now, this would be an absolutely massive blow, and I don't think it's being talked about enough. The extent of American cultural influence throughout the world, and certainly the Anglosphere, or the part of the world that speaks English, is absolutely huge. With the withdrawal of most English-speaking content from TikTok's international app, why would users stick around in the international community? After all, even in countries where English is not the first language, it's often the second language, and it's certainly the language that people use to communicate in on the internet in general. So why stick around when there's just as attractive social media sites like Instagram and Facebook or YouTube Shorts to migrate to? I really think that the US ban or sale of TikTok could effectively remove TikTok as a competitor to Google's YouTube and Meta altogether. So what is the amount of revenue that Google and Meta could stand to gain by the effective destruction of TikTok as a viable business? Well, spoiler alert, it's a lot. In the US alone, last year TikTok made around $16 billion in revenue, and it had been rapidly expanding that number by doubling and tripling its revenues year after year, and there was no reason that it wasn't to do the same this year. Meanwhile, the US revenues make around 25% of its total global revenues. That means it makes around $64 billion per year in revenue from TikTok. That's in comparison to Meta making around $135 billion last year in advertising revenue and YouTube making around $31 billion. Although both of these companies are already growing at prodigious rates, this sale or banning of TikTok potentially will allow them to increase their growth rates to stratospheric levels. I do think this represents a larger opportunity for Meta than Google, because Google is a $300 billion revenue company, and owning YouTube, which is only around 10% of its revenues, having higher growth rates will not materially impact the business by as much as Meta, which has almost all of its revenue from advertising on Instagram and Facebook. Now, both Meta and Google are the largest and second largest positions in my individual stock portfolio, and the companies reported earnings this week. Both of them, I thought, were excellent, but they had very different fortunes in the market. Meta went down by nearly 15% after hours, whereas Google shot up over 10% after its stellar earnings report. Both companies massively outperformed their expectations for revenue and profits, but I believe that the reason that Meta underperformed stock price wise is that Mark Zuckerberg mostly focused on increasing costs at the company and the potential for AI costs and also metaverse costs to increase over the next few years. Whereas Google's Sundar Pichai focused on the success of his cost-cutting and efficiency efforts at the company, as well as the great performance of YouTube and Google Cloud. But personally, I think this is a bit short-sighted from the market, as previous investments by Meta into AI, especially when it comes to algorithmic recommendations, have paid off. After all, Reels, its short-form content designed to rival TikTok, was originally unprofitable, but AI investment and global expansion of the feature has now made it massively profitable and one of Instagram's main killer features. So I personally think that the current downturn in Meta's stock price, even though it's still up significantly year to date, represents a pretty good opportunity to buy into the company. And I will definitely be looking at expanding my position, even though it's already such a large percentage of my portfolio. My investment decision into Meta and Google was taken without the destruction of TikTok as an effective business entirely as a factor. So if that is to take place, I think it's incredibly bullish for both of these companies, and especially Meta, in my opinion. So let me know whether you will be investing into Meta as well, what you think about the company and Google in the comments below. Please leave me a like and subscribe. If you did make it this far and you want to hear about why I'm only ever talking about American and Chinese tech companies and not European tech companies, why is Europe out of the race entirely, then please watch this video here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.